Hello and welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Ishan Gera and here are the stories for the day. The aviation sector in India is seeing a build-up of momentum, from a new entrant placing orders for aircraft to Tata's return to business. But the question is, after being battered by two successive waves of COVID-19, is the sector headed for clear skies and a smooth flight, or is there more turbulence ahead? Let's find the answer.
Contact-intensive services were among the hardest hit by the pandemic, with airlines being no exception. But now, with the infection ebbing and the threat of a third wave diminishing, the aviation sector is seeing green shoots of recovery. Indigo CEO Ronojoy Datta recently told a financial daily that the situation was improving rapidly and faster than the sector had expected. Datta said that while Indigo's performance in the last quarter was strong, the current quarter was also shaping up very well. He underlined that most importantly, revenue and traffic were coming back. In a recent interview with Business Standard, Datta's response to why Indigo was holding back its qualified institutional placement decision also highlighted how the airline is faring.
As things stand, things have been improving rapidly. So this sort of insurance policy that we're thinking of for QIP, I don't think is needed anymore.
So, what do the numbers say? Things are not just looking up for Indigo alone. The entire sector is seeing buoyancy. According to a recent report, November has brought good news for the aviation sector, with daily domestic air traffic reaching close to pre-COVID levels. On 14th November, 385,661 passengers were recorded at departures. This was the highest ever daily traffic seen in India since air travel resumed in May last year, following a 2-month shutdown. This amounted to 96.4% of pre-COVID air traffic level, as, on an average, around 400,000 domestic passengers were recorded on a daily basis in 2019. Fresh blood is also being infused into the sector. Akasa Air, the budget airline backed by Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, recently placed an order for 72 Boeing aircraft. Valued at $9 billion at list prices, the order was signed at the Dubai Air Show. Also, let us not forget the most momentous development for the sector, the privatization of Air India. It is returning to the Tatas after 68 years. If taken together, Tata Sons, which also operates Vistara and AirAsia India, will have around 25% market share of the domestic airline market. That's apart from having the largest Indian airline on international routes. A revitalized Air India, no doubt, will have a major impact on the sector. According to another interview to a national daily, Indigo CEO Ronojoy Datta believes that the disinvestment of Air India is good for the country, the aviation industry, and also Indigo.
I think the Tata Group in particular will be very responsible. They will price the product based on our costs, which many of our current competitors do not do. So to that extent, I think it will be helpful. I think the third or fourth thing we should look at is having the ecosystem get stronger is good for all players, because the Indian ecosystem for aviation is very weak. We don't have MRO capability. Leasing is in dollars. Pilot training is a huge issue. We send people out for pilot training and all that. So getting the ecosystem stronger is really good for us, because if you can get leasing in the gift city and do it in rupees, oh my God, MROs, if you can do it in rupees, oh my God, all this will only happen if the ecosystem gets stronger. And I believe having two good, strong, healthy airlines in India just changes the ecosystem to our advantage. Indigo will be strong, Tata will be strong, I just welcome it.
However, even as the effects of the pandemic recede, high fuel prices are likely to play the role of a spoiler for airlines.
Fuel prices really are a problem. I mean, they were $43 a barrel a year ago. Today, they're about $83 a barrel. Huge impact on our costs. Fortunately, as you said, yields have been rising, and we're still not profitable by it. So obviously, it's not like we. So yields need to go up a little more. Our costs, however, probably will come down a little bit as we add more capacity, just because we're spreading it. This newer engines are a good thing for us. So look, the airline business is always a struggle. If oil goes to $100 a barrel, we'll all get way around. Everyone will get that. But I would guess along with oil at $100 a barrel, the economy would be in trouble too.
Right.
Not just that, which and the economy being in trouble is worse for us probably than oil because it'll take a revenue hit. So I hope oil doesn't go to 100. If it does, we'll all be in a lot of pain.
Things are looking up for the Indian aviation sector, and hopefully, it will not run into any turbulence in the near future, especially triggered by fuel prices or a resurgence in COVID-19 cases.
As with everything else, in the immediate term, the pace of vaccination and managing the spread of COVID-19 will have the greatest impact on airlines. In the long term, hopefully, passenger confidence will keep growing and the international travel will also pick up, so that the aviation industry can fly high. After a sector badly hit by COVID, we talk about another that actually got a boost. Online delivery of groceries became a necessity during the pandemic as people refrained from stepping out of their homes. And now, Indian tech startups are leading the race in taking online delivery to the next level. They're targeting a rising class of ambitious buyers in big cities with the promise of delivering groceries within 10 to 30 minutes. It is being called quick commerce or Q-commerce. What is fueling this need for speed among online grocery startups? Let us understand in this report.
Market dynamics are forcing tech companies to constantly evolve and undercut each other. In e-commerce, firms are competing not only on pricing and quality, but also on how fast they reach your doorstep. It started with Swiggy launching Instamart, promising grocery delivery in 15 to 30 minutes in Bengaluru and Gurugram. Soon, Dunzo stepped in with its 19-minute delivery promise. Then Grofers with a 10-minute pledge. Now, Zepto, a startup run by 19-year-old Stanford dropouts Adit Palicha and Kevalya Vora, is also promising 10-minute delivery of groceries. So how are these firms able to deliver groceries in such a short time? The answer is dark stores. These dark stores or micro warehouses are located close to the point of delivery, as opposed to large warehouses on the city outskirts. Hundreds of dark stores service an entire city like Delhi, compared to 3 to 4 large warehouses. Each dark store manages a focused set of 1500 to 2000 stock keeping units or SKUs, which are distinct product items. Now startups are using technologies inside these dark stores to reduce the processing time for orders. We spoke to Dunzo CEO Kabir Viswas to understand more about this.
A city like Bangalore, we have close to about 22 odd warehouses running, and overall, I think by the end of the year, we'll have about 65 odd warehouses running, right? We are partnering with what you call local entrepreneurs to be able to set this up. And what that allows us to do is make sure that the experience metrics for our customers are insanely quick, which means that today, actually on an average, our average orders get delivered within 13 minutes time, right? And so I think the 19-minute promise is just so that we can go ahead and under promise and over deliver at each instance. We have gone ahead and built ground up tech that allows us to go ahead and have shipping time within our dark stores at close to about 70 seconds. So on an average, any order that comes into the store at really high orders per hour, we are able to go ahead and make sure that it's ready to ship from the warehouse within 70 seconds time. There's a delivery partner who's right outside, and with the density that we are going at, we are able to go ahead and deliver a really large chunk of our orders within 13 to 14 minutes time. We have made sure that the 5 or 6 pickers that we have during the what you call peak order time of about 300 orders per hour. At that point, we have gone ahead and taken away decision making for them completely. We are also going ahead and automating some parts of the picking process, where two things will end up happening. A few of the baskets will go ahead and be what you call ready proactively based upon what people are buying on the app, as well as some of the items that are relevant to say 75% of baskets will start going ahead and getting automated, picked, and put within the what you call basket at that point of time itself.
We also spoke to Adit Palicha, founder and CEO at Zepto, which was launched this year. It operated in stealth mode for around 6 months before closing a $60 million fundraise earlier this month.
Currently integrated with software that helps navigate our packer workforce through the most ideal path in the dark store to pack an order when it comes in, so they can navigate themselves through the shortest path, get all the products packed, and then sort of move to the dispatch station. Or for example, on the last mile side, we've built out auto allocation algorithms so that our riders are constantly assigned to an order when they come into the micro warehouse. There isn't a delay between when you press the checkout button and when your order is assigned to a delivery driver. And so those are some of the technical processes that we've implemented internally within our micro warehouses. Beyond that, if you look at the way we've designed the operations of the store, currently we've got about 2,500 SKUs to 3,000 SKUs that are listed in one of the micro warehouses that we partner with. We've also got 3.5 kilometer radiuses that each micro warehouse services in an area. So, for example, if you're sitting in Dwarka and Delhi, we might need 1 or 2 micro warehouses to service the entire area and get deliveries done in 10 minutes flat. Or whether you're sitting in Defense Colony, that might just be one micro warehouse. Or if you're sitting in Saket, it also might just be one micro warehouse. So it depends on the size, but roughly within a 3.5 kilometer radius, if you position your micro warehouse in exactly the right location in an area, you probably are able to get access to a maximum number of customers in 10 minutes or less.
However, as Indian startups are gunning to become the fastest to deliver your groceries, their race has also triggered a debate on social media. Given the condition of our roads and the traffic in our big cities, is it fair for startups to make their delivery partners work under a time constraint of as little as 10 minutes? Responding to the criticism, Grofar CEO Albinder Dhindsa clarified that his company is in no way forcing its delivery partners to drive faster. He said, "Our partner stores are located within 2 kilometers of our customers. We have 60 plus stores in Delhi and 30 plus in Gurugram. Our stores are so densely located that we can deliver 90% of our orders within 15 minutes, even if our riders drove at 10 km per hour. Our in-store planning and tech is now so good that we pack most orders under 2.5 minutes. The market penetration of quick commerce is estimated at around $0.3 billion in the calendar year 2021 and is expected to grow to $5 billion by 2025, according to a new report by Redseer. The growth will be led by convenience-seeking customers, among them ambitious millennials who are impulse purchasers in the big cities. The addressable market for quick commerce in India is 20 million households, according to Redseer. However, analysts aren't sure about the sustainability of the quick commerce model in India. Online grocery startups operate on wafer-thin profit margins of around 10 to 20%. Now add to that the cost of delivering groceries in 10, 15 or 19 minutes by operating several dark stores, as opposed to the hyper-local model. Analysts add that while customers will not say no to quick deliveries, it is highly unlikely they'll choose to pay extra for it. It remains to be seen if quick commerce startups can create an addressable market and sustain the race for faster deliveries.
Speed sure is the catchword among technology and consumer internet startups in India, and in their race for capital, IPOs are a flavor of the season. While the rallying stock market has spurred multiple tech unicorns to raise funds by going public, market watchdog SEBI has proposed to tighten rules around the use of IPO proceeds as well as the lock-in period for anchor investors. Now this comes amid a record 1 trillion plus rupee mop-up through initial share sales this year. Separately, global ratings agency Fitch Ratings has retained India's ratings at the lowest investment grade with a negative outlook. What are the new rules proposed by SEBI? How will they impact primary markets? And how do the analysts interpret the Fitch stance? Let's find out.
In a bid to safeguard investors' interest, market regulator SEBI has proposed to tweak rules governing IPOs to bring in more transparency and accountability. The regulator recently issued a consultation paper in this regard and has sought feedback before the end of this month. The notable changes include a cap on the amount companies, mainly startups, can raise for inorganic growth initiatives, and also on the quantum existing shareholders can offload in the IPO. Further, SEBI has proposed to increase the lock-in period for anchor investors from 30 days to 90 days. It has also called for the monitoring of IPO proceeds. The proposed tightening of IPO funding comes amidst a gale of public offers, which is likely to see a record mop-up of 1 trillion rupees this year. Besides, a bulk of this money was raised by new age and loss-making tech-based startups including Paytm, Policybazaar and Zomato. Let's go to Amrish Balika, an independent market expert, to understand why SEBI proposed such changes and what it means for investors.
It's good that SEBI has recognized the problem areas. Most of the recent IPOs are actually offer for sale. The fresh raise has been negligible except possibly for Paytm. In case of new age companies, it's basically handing over the baby to the public by early investors and promoters. Such a sale, I think, should be capped at 50% irrespective of the promoter holding, as these companies need cash for their growth. However, the interests of the selling shareholders seem paramount in the IPO, as everybody is looking to encash the bullish sentiments in the secondary markets. Let me take the example of Nykaa. It was a 5,300 crore issue. Only 630 crores was raised for the company. Balance was sale by PE investors as well as promoters. Just after the issue, promoters pledged about 4,000 crores worth of equity to possibly raise 2,000 crores, mostly for the cash requirement of the company. Could this have actually been raised in the IPO? Regarding acquisition funding, it may not always be possible to identify the specific takeover target, but my suggestion would be to keep that in an escrow account, monitored by an agency so that it is not used up for cash burn. The other suggestion was on the anchor category. It seems they are anchors only by the name. It's basically a route to short circuit the IPO. I would suggest that the anchor category itself should be removed. If not, the holding period should be increased to 6 months, as many have been misusing this to make a quick buck. Coming to the general corporate purpose category, this has been the most misused part of the IPO. Some of the IPOs, the portion allocated for fresh sale of equity has been mostly general corporate purpose. Basically, this means that you can use the funds for anything you like. And what I understand is that many a times these funds get used for post-IPO market making activities. It's good that SEBI is proposing to monitor this very closely.
While the proposals are yet to be adopted, industry players feel changes around anchor investors and cap on OFS quantum could come across as extremely unpalatable and may have a cascading effect on the Indian capital markets going forward. Given this, it remains to be seen what the market watchdog will decide after receiving stakeholders' feedback. In a separate development, equity investors received a nasty surprise from global rating agency Fitch Ratings. On 16th of November, the agency maintained India's ratings at the lowest investment grade of BBB- or BBB- with a negative outlook on account of high debt and limited fiscal headroom. This comes after Moody's Investors Service recently upgraded its investment outlook to stable from negative. However, economists believe since India is probably going to be one of the best performing economies in the world this year, investors should focus on the country's reform agenda. We spoke to Madan Sabnavis, who is chief economist at CARE Ratings, for a detailed analysis.
India should be ideally in the grade of at least A, but currently we are still kept at BBB-, which is the lowest investment grade. But the outlook is something which came as a surprise because the other two rating agencies have taken a stable outlook for India, but since rating is a very subjective opinion being given by agencies, Fitch has evidently felt that the outlook should be negative. Now, the main concern which Fitch has mentioned in their arguments is that the fiscal situation still appears to be fragile. Now, while India's fiscal deficit is definitely higher and the debt levels are higher than the median of the comparable countries, it should be remembered that the government has been very prudent even during the pandemic times. And while a number of Western economies have actually gone in for a fiscal stimulus by giving tax breaks and cash transfers, this was done to a very limited extent by the government of India. So I think the entire way in which we tackled the pandemic was keeping the fiscal numbers in mind. And this was where even certain domestic critics felt that the government should have been a bit more aggressive. Now, surprisingly, while Moody's and S&P have actually appreciated the fact that we did not go in for such freebies during those difficult times, Fitch has obviously taken a different view on it. But we are hopeful that in future, as the economy grows and the fiscal ratios look much better, which are bound to happen as our GDP grows, and India is probably going to grow at one of the highest rates in 21-22, there will be a good reason for Fitch to reconsider their view on India's rating.
These developments, along with inflationary and valuation concerns, are likely to keep the markets volatile in days ahead. Yesterday, the BSE Sensex fell 314 points to close at 60,008. The Nifty 52 shed 100 points and ended at 17,899. Trading volume in the secondary market, however, may remain thin today given a long weekend ahead. Further, all eyes will be on the listing of Paytm, which concluded India's biggest IPO last week. The grey market premium has fallen sharply over the past few days and was in the negative territory on Wednesday.
The grim investment outlook seems to have found a reflection on the Delhi NCR skyline. As the sky turned grey and the air started smelling of soot last week, all schools in Delhi were shut and industrial activities were suspended. We were told that the AQI had gone past the dangerous level. But what exactly is the AQI and what does it indicate? Let us find out in our next report.
Air Quality Index, or AQI for short, gives us a rough idea about how good or bad the quality of air in a particular area is. A high AQI value means a higher level of air pollution. India introduced its own AQI system in 2015 to keep a tab on its rising pollution. Before that, we were relying on the US Air Quality Index, which didn't fit the bill given the different conditions and pollutants found here. India has been measuring pollutants in the air for decades now. It started making them public recently. On a table of 1 to 500, the pollution table is divided into 6 colored bands. It begins with the good green band, in which the AQI level is set between 1 and 50. The worst is the red band, where the AQI level is fixed at 401 to 500. After Diwali, the AQI level at several spots in Delhi had reached 500, which has been categorized as severe, prompting the government to take some strict measures. The Environmental Protection Agency calculates the AQI for all the major air pollutants. These are ground level ozone, particle pollution, or particulate matter, that is PM 2.5 and PM 10, besides carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide. The Indian AQI was tailor-made for our needs, as it also measured lead and ammonia, which the US AQI did not. It also gives real-time data on air quality. Each of these pollutants has been given a weight according to its impact on human health. The AQI is a composite score of all the major pollutants present in the air. The northern states, including Delhi, have seen a rise in AQI levels over the past decade due to a rise in population, which led to a sharp jump in the number of vehicles to transport them and also the goods they consume. The recent rise in slash and burn farming has also contributed to the air pollution, which turns deadly in the capital during winters every year.
That's all we have for you today. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and analysis in our next episode. Stay tuned and thank you for watching.
If you liked this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.